So we just finished our panel on embracing all emotions, and one of the themes was how we get into judgment about our own feelings and how we start saying, well, I'm feeling this, but I shouldn't. And that's really connected with the fact that in our society, there's so many times when we hear, happiness is what it's all about. And if you're not happy, there's something wrong. I love happiness. It's awesome. But so is sorrow. So is fear, even anger. What if all our feelings are there for a reason and they're a gift from us to us and they're there to help us figure out what's important? Take a listen. Clover, I want to come back to you for a second and this thing that Gabrielle brought up. It's related to what Ayman was just talking about, kind of keeping a distance from feelings. And when they're so big, you've grappled yourself with tremendous anxiety. And it feels so big. What do you do so you don't drown?
Such a good question. Yeah, so I've experienced anxiety my entire life, and it's very much ebbed and flowed at different points. I've experienced panic attacks and, just that real sense of inundation and kind of looking in the face of a tsunami of emotions almost. And when I first came into awareness of my feelings, cognitive behavioral therapy really, really worked. As some of the panelists have touched on it, it's, becoming friends with your feelings, or at least first getting some kind of objective distance from them so you don't feel completely beholden to them and their own kind of whims. But I think, working in the climate space especially, I found myself doing this kind of mental gymnastics, and it really crescendoed late last year when my home country of Australia was burning. And it was so big and so enormous that I found myself just spontaneously breaking down in public. I kept bursting into tears, and I didn't feel like I had any of that kind of control because the feelings were so big and so enormous. And in fact, that was when I realized that rather than trying to keep those emotions kind of capped in a bottle, I had to create the space for grief, and I had to create the space for sadness. And I think we live in a society that has kind of commodified emotions. You hear a lot about positive psychology and how to be your best and biggest and brightest self. And we've kind of disallowed a lot of those darker feelings, which are really, really essential, because otherwise we're kind of anesthetizing ourselves to the problems, whether they're the big problems like climate change or the pandemic, or there are those problems that really affect us, in our day-to-day lives. So really, it's what I've learned to do is kind of be okay with all of those feelings and get better at vacillating between them without necessarily surrendering or spiraling, but just naming them, labeling them, and creating the space for them.
Gabrielle, I think that's a great segue to your work. And I'm curious, it seems to me like people under about 35, when we start talking about emotional intelligence, they say, oh, yes, absolutely, we need that. And yet there is this cultural phenomenon that some emotions are positive and some are negative, and we should be happy. And if we're not happy, maybe there's something wrong with us. What has helped you make space for the conversation of whether they're darker or more complicated, or as Ayman sometimes says, there are feelings that narrow our attention and focus us on problems, and feelings that expand our attention? What's helped you make space for those more challenging conversations?
So I think for me, the challenging emotions and those big feelings came about. So I want to commend Clover for doing all of the self work and everything that she's just describing, and I think it's amazing. I wish that I had been that self aware 7 years ago. I'm only a little bit ahead of you there, and age wise, but I think that some of these really big dark feelings are scary because you sit in them and you feel like you're the only person in this hole, and you feel like nobody else can possibly be this kind of bad human for feeling this way when everything is going your way, and you have people that love you in your life, like anything good that you have, you feel like you're ungrateful for because you feel like, how could I possibly feel this way if all of these things are good tangibly that I can point to? And you can try all these coping mechanisms where you start a gratitude list and you list things down. And yes, it's a great exercise and it's a practice. So no, it doesn't work overnight. But when you continue to do it, you realize that, man, all of these things on paper matter. And even though I can't convince myself in my head right now, one day when I'm a little bit past and detached from this emotion, I'll be able to look back and see, man, I was recognizing it then. So I think that the scariest part about sitting with these things is feeling like you're the only one. And I think that what brought me peace was working to create this community and recognizing that I was surrounded by people who also were feeling the same thing. So I wasn't this terrible human for having these feelings or for not feeling grateful all the time or for, letting anxiety and depression take over. It's a human emotion. It's a human space to be in, and just recognizing that and learning to not judge myself and not, it's one thing to have the feeling. It's another thing to hate yourself for feeling that way. And I think that you really have to be able to divorce the two of those things and recognize, like, yes, feelings are fleeting. They come and they go. You are not your feelings, and you're not alone in whatever you are feeling.
This is one of my biggest concerns about the way we contextualize emotions in so many cultures around the world, is that when we start talking about negative feelings, we start sending these messages that, some feelings are good and some feelings are bad. And if you have the bad ones, there's something wrong with you.